A really cool way to portray an action sequence in Photoshop is to take several consecutive shots and run them together as a single composite image. For example, here we've got a stunt bike flying through the air, and the camera person has popped the camera on rapid fire mode or burst mode or continuous shooting mode, depending on the make of camera that you use and the jargon that it's got in the manual. But here we have frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and he lands on frame 7. Now you'll notice in frame 7 it's nicely framed, so we can see the guy's feet and the edge of the shot quite clearly. But if we go back to say frame 3, for example, then we're actually chopping off the bottom of their feet because the cameraman is tilting up to follow the move of the bike. So what we have to do is do a lot of aligning and moving and blending in Photoshop to get the bike to appear to fly through the air in a composite image. Before we move on to Photoshop, I'll very quickly say that if you're shooting something like this, then take an exposure reading and set the exposure to manual so that it doesn't change on each frame, because otherwise the sky might get darker or lighter and it'll make it harder to mix all of the shots together. And also lock the focus off on probably on infinity in this case, because the bike's quite far away, because you don't want the focus hunting between each shot and causing things to come blurred or sharp as you're panning and tilting. And once you've got all of your frames together, then what you can do is composite them in a single shot like this, just to show the action happening. You could have a guy diving off a diving board or a bike flying through the air like this. It's a really cool way of showing action in a still image. And the trick to getting this to work is to use the move tool to align each layer and to use layer masks to show and hide the appropriate sections of each image, because you're really only interested in the bike in most of these shots. So I'll show you how to align and blend the layers together in the next few steps. So of course you won't have got this finished composite yet because you haven't started, so let's go and close that up by Control and W, and then we can open up our original source files by going to File, Open, navigate to the folder in which those files are and choose Shots 1, hold down Shift, choose 7 and then click Open, and they'll all open up within Photoshop, and you can see it's almost like a movie playing here as it brings them in frame by frame. And if you click here to bring up the clip bin, you can see the shots together running consecutively down the bottom there. And make sure that the shots are in the right order here, just to help you keep it organized. Frame 7's at the beginning, so let's just drag that to the end, and you now have frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 in the right order. Okay, let's just shrink the layers palette down for a little while, just to make some space. In fact, I can go to More, Palette Options, and just shrink the thumbnail to make it take up less space on screen. There we go. Let's pop that up there for the moment, and now we'll start with our last shot here, because this is the most appropriately framed shot for the whole of the frame. This is our master shot, and we've got the guy's feet in shot here, so we'll use this as the main background. Now because we've got 7 shots, this is going to be layer 7, so double click on it and type 07. So this is our last frame in the sequence. Now what we can do is go to frame 6, which is this one here, double click to open it, and then Control A to select all, or just press select all up here, edit and copy, and then double click back on here to open up our frame 7 again, and edit paste onto that as a new layer. And what we need to do now is reduce the opacity of the new layer to try and align the bike with the rest of the image. Take the move tool and just drag the layer around. What I'm going to do is use the mountains as a guide there, because they're not changing too much. So there's the bike floating just before landing, and we're not worrying about anything really outside of the area of the bike, because that's all we're going to see eventually on this layer, so don't worry about what the guys are doing here. Okay, reduce the opacity back up to, or increase it rather, up to 100%, and there is our next layer, and let's label that 06 just so we know which frame it is. Okay, let's go to frame 5 now, double click to open it up, Control A to select all, Control C to copy. Let's go back by double clicking again on our main composite layer now, and Control V to paste the shot in. And instead of changing opacity using the slider, I'm going to hit 5, and that gives me a 50% opacity. So we can now move the layer around and get it aligned here. I'm using the mountains as my guide. So here's the new bike in a new position. Let's call this 05 for layer 5. And to set opacity back up to 100%, you can just press 0. So that's a quick way of doing that. So you've got that layer and that layer now all aligned in the correct position.